Hiya, it's another EPP tutorial, and this time it's on pattern matching when English paper piecing with houses. So I'm going to start off by saying I feel major imposter syndrome doing this video because pattern matching is not something that I find easy, it's not something that comes natural, and it isn't anything that I can do that well. That being said, I can do it to the extent that you can tell what the original motif was. So I'm doing this video to give you an idea of kind of tips and tricks that I find useful, but it isn't a foolproof way of doing it. So find the way that works for you. Leave a comment if you've got suggestions or ideas for kind of techniques that work for you. Have a play and just see. It is difficult, and it's like any other skill in that you have to practice, and I think gradually the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. So I'm hoping that by the end of 2020 it'll be a technique that I don't dread doing. But yeah, so that's me being honest with you, and I hope this video is helpful, but don't take it as gospel, all right? And the top tips that I would say for doing it are to make sure you've got good lighting, make sure you've got a good solid base, whether that's a lat tray or a table or kind of some sort of desk surface that you're working at, and have lots of treats nearby as well to reward yourself as you go, because it is difficult and you do need to take breaks, and it still needs to be enjoyable. So if it's not enjoyable, then just stop doing it, all right? And then come back to it either at a later date or just skip it as a method. You know, it isn't something you have to do. So let's get looking at how I do pattern matching when English paper piecing with houses. Okay, so if you're going to be doing this along with me, then I'll just show you the tools that I've got. I've got a pair of scissors that are my paper scissors. I've got thread snippers, my Clover wonder clips, biro, quite a thin biro, some blue tack, sewing thread and basting thread, tracing paper. I've got a pair of fabric scissors over here, my house templates, my Clover pins, and my fabric. And this fabric is from the Elinor collection for Dashwood Studios by Brookes. Okay, so I'm going to go through this as if you're pattern matching across all 4 of your houses. So I'll show you the way that I do it. I'm going to start off by using a teeny tiny bit of blue tack. I'm just going to blue tack the 4 templates together, and you only want to have a little bit because you really don't want it to be lifted off your table much. So just enough that it's not going to wobble around whilst you're drawing over it. There we go, if I can get it to unstick from my thumb. And you really want this bit to be precise, so try to make sure that you're not leaving any gaps in between the templates, and that then laying nice and flat on your table. And then just do your 4th one. And the principle's the same. If you want to do pattern matching, also including in, if you're doing the squares in the corners or in the half square triangles, then you can do this the same too, and just, you're going to stick those down as well. So I'm then going to get my tracing paper, and what I'm going to do, quite like to do it on the tracing paper because then it can go in paper recycling afterwards, so it's not wasting, not using that plastic or acetate or anything. I'm then going to draw exactly on the line of the houses, and I want to measure out these 4 here. You can see it's just gone a bit skewy there. And try and get it, there's me saying try and get it as accurate as possible as I'm wiggling my pen around. But you can also feel the edge of the templates, you can kind of use that as a ruler. And what I've done is I've pushed, because I know the paper's already at right angles, so I've actually pushed up here and up here so I'm not having to make more work for myself than there needs to be. So I'm just drawing round. And you can see here that I'm already doing mistakes, so it really don't stress about perfection. Pattern matching is really difficult. And it isn't a technique that I find easy, it isn't something that comes naturally, and it's something that I'm really hoping will continue to improve the more that I do it. So there you go. That's essentially going to be my 4 that I'm going to pattern match. You can see here I've gone a bit wonky, so I'm just going to ignore that line that's gone wonky and stick with the one that I want. At this point then I'm just going to take my templates off, take the blue tack off, and I'm then going to use this almost like my fuss cutting acrylic, but I'm going to use the tracing paper for it instead. So I'm going to move these templates out of the way for now. I'm going to move the blue tack out of the way so I don't get muddled up with that. Okay, so now I'm going to come on to the fabric. So I've got my 4 marked out, and I've decided that the pattern I want to choose to pattern match across, you can lay this on top here and kind of see which one, whether it works within your shape or not. Sometimes it can be a larger motif that won't necessarily fit within your 4 houses, so this is kind of a really good chance to try it within your houses to see whether it works before you start cutting into the fabric. And also the other thing I want to say is make sure that the motifs you're choosing, you have 4 repeats, and you can see here that this one and this one look really similar, but actually this one's bigger than this one, and this one's got a red door and that one doesn't, so you really need to make sure, and the top of it's slightly different colour as well, so make sure that when you're drawing your pattern out, which is what we're going to do next, you are using the same when you then cut it out. So I've then put my tracing paper on top, and I'm kind of working out wherever it is I want the house to go. I could place it centrally within the block, but I actually know then that if I've got these windows here right on these joins, and that's actually going to make it a little bit trickier for me than I want to make it. It's already a tricky method, so I'm trying to make it as easy for myself as possible. So I'm going to move it down slightly. So instead of pattern matching the windows across 1, 2, 3 houses at a time, I've moved it down slightly, so I'm only pattern matching the windows across 2. Then what you're going to do is you're going to draw this onto your tracing paper, and you want to do this in as much detail and accuracy as possible because this is going to be your template. So every little detail that you might think isn't important, it is, because this is what's going to happen when you're lining it all up inside. So I'm going to draw the roof out, and then I'm going to draw the windows on. Make sure you don't press too hard because you don't want to go through to the fabric, it is only tracing paper. Continue drawing this one down here, and then draw this little house on. And do check out the Elinor collection because the whole collection is really, really beautiful. And it has lots of fussy cutting potential, so it's a really great fun collection to have. There you go. Right, so I've drawn the house onto here, obviously not a patch on the fabric, and I'm then going to use my paper scissors, not my fabric scissors, and I'm going to cut this out. This is now going to be my templates. I'll just get rid of that bit. And you could have done, if you were pattern matching into those outer shapes as well, that's when you can then start to, so if I then wanted to catch, see there, I then would have caught the bit of the house over here and the bit of the castle over here. So that's when you start to pattern match those bits into it as well. But we're just going to focus on these 4. So I'm just going to cut it out and make sure you're getting it exactly on the lines. You don't want to cut outside the lines, you want to cut exactly on the lines, because that's the size of your paper pieces. So cut those outer shapes off. I'm just going to get rid of those tracing paper bits, and then this bit's probably the easiest bit because you can then just cut straight through the middle and straight through the middle. Okay, so they are going to be your 4 guiding templates. I'm just going to, this one I wish I probably should have labelled them. If you do that and you've realised probably should have labelled that, then this is probably when you, yeah, so that one goes there, so that's going to be my right, that's the top, that's the bottom, and that's the left. So again, that sometimes it can help if you just write the little numbers on it so you kind of know which way to do it. So now I'm going to come on to doing the fabric. And if you think you've traced it directly onto here, so you're then going to want to work on the reverse side of the fabric. So opening it out, well, you can do it on either side actually, because you're just cutting it out at this stage. So I'm going to come down here because it's right on the edge of the fabric. Actually no, I won't, because that's not even the right motif. Right, so I'm going to do this on here. I'm going to place that template on top, and I'm making sure that lines up with everything else. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. I'm just going to make a snip into the fold of the fabric, so I'm not having to charge my scissors right up into it, the entirety of the fabric. And I'm being fairly generous with my seam allowance here, because I want to be able to have enough wiggle room that if I've got it slightly off or slightly not where I want it to be, then I can just play around with it a little bit. Okay, so I've now cut out that with my wonky cutting, and that's fine. Just turn it over to the reverse, and I'm then gonna, remember now you've reversed your fabric, you're gonna reverse your template. So you're gonna place this on top here, and you should be able to see it through here. Check that you're lining it up, and you can see here that my attempt at drawing Ali's design, and it's just about lining up there, which is exactly where I want it to be. So at this point you can either, because obviously this is a bit flimsy, you can either pin that on, and then, so I'll show you actually. So it makes it easier sometimes if you've got a sturdier thing. So I'm just gonna, you can then pin that there, and that's holding that bit in place, and I'm just double checking it all. And that's just wiggled off slightly, so I'm going to hold that there, and there, and there. So this is where you want to hold it in as many places as possible to stop it wiggling around. And really check it is lining up correctly. And then, because like I said, it is tracing paper, so if you want to add your paper template on now, slide that out, and then just re-clip it all into place, and that kind of just gives it a little bit of extra strength. Don't worry about there being 2 layers of paper now, because when you come to remove your papers, once you've finished whatever it is that you're making, then you just take the 2 out together, and that's fine. Right, so that's where I want it to be, and then going to fold it over and baste it in exactly the same way we've basted in our other shapes. So I'm just checking that's kind of where I want it to be, and I'm just going to go through. I go through on the corners to hold that down, and then I just gradually work my way around and kind of check it hasn't moved as you go. Use your thumb to push that corner in, and then take your needle back down on the point. If you've got a bigger template like a 1.5, these are 1-inch houses, then I'd actually recommend doing a couple of stitches all the way along, because you really don't want it to move. You've kind of got that precision, you've got it exactly where you want it to be, so you want it to stay there. These are 1 inches, so I kind of find 1 stitch works as you go on each edge. So just come back to this last one, kind of where I started, just taking the clips off as I go, and then tuck that last one under, take my needle down to hold the fold into place, and then I'll just put a couple of knots on the back of my work, untangle my thread first from here, and I'll just, oops, as I ping it out there, there you go, and I'll use my thread snippers, and then check here, and then I'm just going to quick tie a knot in this, because otherwise when I come to baste the next one I realise I haven't tied a knot in it, and it just comes straight through. One knot, 2 knot, okay, perfect. So at this point you could then double check it with the template still, check everything's still going to line up. So you can see there that that's going to meet the house, the window in the house, sorry. And then that one is still going to meet the window in the house there. So I know that that's all still going to work. So those templates are still all right. If at this point you realise that it's not quite right, then I would actually undo this one and start again, because it's much easier just to undo one than have to change the other three once you've cut it out. So I'm going to come on to, you're just going to repeat that process. So I'll come on to the next house now then. And I'm now going to cut out this window. So again, I'll line it up. Make sure that I've got the bottom of the window lined up there. And then just use my scissors, make a snip into a fold. And then just cut it around. And I tend to add I was going to say a generous 3/8, but that's probably not, that's not a very scientific measurement, is it? But yeah, a generous 3/8. Right, so I'll use my needle too. So then I flip it over and wear it from the reverse. Just line that up. And just really take the time, really don't rush doing this. Because you want it to be as accurate as possible. That's where it comes from for the pattern matching. It is all in the accuracy. I actually think that might be there. Okay, so at that point I'm then going to get my template. Actually no, I'm not. I'm going to pin it on like I said I did. Just to stop that wiggling around there as I then add. This is the bit where I want the precision more so than down this end. I'm going to check that's all lining up there. I'm going to add the clip there, there, there. And then I might even add a clip up here as well, just because this is now where I want to be even more sure that I'm getting this precision right. So then take this off and I'm going to lay this paper piece on top. You could just fold it straight over the tracing paper. My tracing paper is quite thin, so sometimes I accidentally end up folding the paper rather than just the fabric over the edge of it. So I'm just going to check here, because this is essentially the bit where I'm going to fold, where I want it to line up with the other piece. So I'm going to fold these edges, and before I start thread basting, I'm going to check it to see whether I've got the placement right. I'm going to line it up here, and I can see here that it's a bit skew-iff. That isn't where I wanted it to be at all. So at this point it's so much easier to just take it off here, because I know that wasn't right. And then I might, yeah, no, that's right. And then I'm just going to go back to it, working from the wrong side, laying it on top and checking it again. And I'm going to clip it again. And I'm checking it here, and you can almost see that it's finishing off the pattern on the back of the work as well, because essentially if you're pattern matching at the front, it should pattern match on the back of your work as well, because you're just recreating the design. So I'm then going to pop this on top this time and see whether that helps for precision. Right, and so this time I'm going to do it flat on the table, just because trying to do it all mid-air, you're more likely to move it around. So I'm going to put it flat on the table. I've used the tracing paper, and I've then used a tiny bit of blue tack on my paper piece to lay it on top, so it's not going to wiggle around. And then what I did is I just gradually slid these Clover clips in like that. And what I'm going to do is, before I start thread basting it now, I'm going to check it again. Just take these two clips off and check it against here. So you can see it's still not perfect, but it's enough that I'm going to be happy with that when it's in a whole thing, because it's not worth the hassle of doing, redoing, undoing, then doing it again. For that ever so slight section, you know, when it comes together, when it sews together and it's in a whole quilt, is pattern matched enough. And I'm saying that as a perfectionist who gets really stressed out when things aren't perfect, and it is really hard for me to not perfect it. But it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done and good enough. As long as we can, you know, see what it originally was. It's not like I've got a door as a window and a window as a chimney. I'm just going to go ahead and baste all these corners into place. And when you're tracing out the pattern, I'd also really recommend, I'm just going to put that there actually because I don't want that to wiggle. I'd also really recommend, as well as the motif itself that you're trying to pattern match, draw any other kind of areas of the fabric that are happening nearby, because then that really helps you to make sure that you've got your paper piece in exactly the right place. So I'll just grab the fabric. So when I laid, you know what I mean. When I place that on top, let me find where the motif is here, and I'm then laying my next house on over here, the tracing paper would have caught a section of this castle turret over here, so draw that onto the tracing paper too, so you can help to make sure you have got it in the right place. Right, so I'm just gonna finish basting this one. Come back up there, and then just tighten the knot. So that same process of, I've basted the other two off camera, just for speed, because I know it's quite a long video already, and I wanted to show you how to sew it together first. So I used the tracing paper, I flipped the tracing paper over onto the wrong side. Hold on, I'll grab the template again. So you have your tracing paper and you have your drawn motif on it. You then flip it over onto the wrong side of the work. Make sure you're doing it on a flat surface. Line it up there. Then get your house template. Or cut the fabric out first. Kind of rough guide of where you want it to go. Lay your house template with a tiny bit of blue tack directly on top there. And imagine this is cut out. You can then slide your Clover wonder clips in, and then you can hold it in place in all these areas here, and gradually fold it around without basting yet, without using your glue or your thread, just to check the placement. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, you're going to have your 4 basted shapes. And you can just check it again here. So I'm going to lay it on here. That one. And again, this is where I really do recommend using the shop bought paper pieces, because they have been laser cut for precision, so it can be much harder if you're doing homemade templates. They will match up when it's sewn. Right, so if we're going to talk about sewing them together, when it's pattern matching, I tend to do a flat back stitch. Now I'm not a natural flat back stitcher, is that a right thing to do? And it takes a bit of getting used to. You quite often use it with curves with EPP. Sorry, I'll just stop the camera wobbling. And also, because I had quite a generous seam allowance, I'm just going to trim. I don't normally do this, but when sewing together the pattern matching, because you want to get as clear a sight as possible. So I'm just, see there, and just trimming it down ever so slightly on those bits here, so I can kind of see. Remember when I said if you're pattern matching on the front, you're also going to be pattern matching on the back. So you kind of want to be able to see a fair bit of your pattern on the back. This will help you when you're doing your flat back stitching. This one's going to be a little bit trickier to do. I might just fold that one out of the way. That'll teach me for making too big a seam allowance. Right, so flat back stitching. So make sure you've got a really thin, sharp needle. That definitely helps. and you are going to line up. So I'm going to check these two here. So normally I whip stitch, so I would fold these together like this, and then I would just whip stitch the two together. When I pattern match, I tend to find that this takes out just an ever so tiny bit of the fabric, and it kind of distorts it ever so slightly. It's probably the perfectionist in me coming through here. So so you hold it together like that and check the placements where you want it to be, and then you're going to use these Clover wonder clips. I'm just going to clip that there, checking it's all lining up. And if I move this out of the way, if I can get it to move out of the way there, so you can see there that it should just about there. It's lining up on the back as well. Move that into focus there, yeah. So flat back stitching. I'm actually going to put a clip to hold it in this end as well. So thread a couple of knots in, and when you do flat back stitching, I'm going to start up towards this point here. I'm just going to move that because I want that to line up there. So I'm going to go through, you're literally skimming the back of your work there. So I'm just going to take a couple of anchoring stitches there. I've got a knot to stop it going through. And I'm just going to take 2 stitches. So 1, 2. And that's just to make sure that my knot isn't on a weak end of where I'm sewing the block, which is essentially where the points meet. And then you're kind of just going to skim, move this out of the way, you're just going to skim the back of your work. So I'm going to take a couple of stitches as I go to work my way up to this point over here. And then I'm just going to go slowly, making sure I'm catching just the edges of the fibres. Edges of fibres, that makes sense? Just catching the fibres on the edges, that's probably better, isn't it? And not the paper pieces. And I'm just going to gradually work my way back to the other Clover clips. So when you get to this bit here, as far as too big my seam allowance, you can kind of just use your needle and pull it out the way. I'm just going to check the placement there is where I want it. Sorry, I took it off camera. Just going to check the placement there is where I want it to be. Just going to move that out the way, hold it, and continue to take my stitches. And I'm just skimming across the back of the work with the 2 fibres from each coming together. And you're going to continue working all the way along, and again then when you get to the other side you're just going to tie. So you'll get down to here, and then I would actually bring the thread back through to here to do your knot. So I'm going right up to this point and take a couple of anchoring stitches here, and then I'm going to almost jump back about 1/4 of an inch here so that my knot isn't on the weak point. Just make sure I haven't caught the tail of my thread then in it as well. So go through once, go through twice. You've got, once to make sure it's not caught in your house, leave a little loop of thread, and you're going to pass it through once, twice, pull it, and there you've knotted your thread. And you can kind of see, if it's not for my seam allowance, that it should be starting to line up front and back. Okay, so you're then going to repeat that with joining these two with your flat back stitch, and then once you've joined the 2 pairs, you then join them together, and then when it's all sewn together, give it a quick press, and then there you go. You can see how the lines are flowing from this house through to this house, and the windows are matching up here and going across there, and again this is going across here, and it's just caught there. So there you go, that is your pattern matching house and a house. Let me know what you think, leave a comment and any tips or tricks that help you when you're pattern matching. And I'll see you soon for another tutorial. Bye!